Well, as we approach Labor Day and the traditional kickoff of the campaigns, of course, I think they kicked off a little early this year. Just want to kind of bring some thoughts about the coming campaign and the strategy and so forth. Um, First of all, we're entering this current situation, which is kind of a fairly strong approval rating in the Rasmussen poll of 52% support with strong opposition and strong support basically evening out. So Trump has done pretty good last week in campaigning. In fact, it was so good, apparently, the Democrats apparently had to fire their October surprise in early September. And that indicates that they're a little worried, or they would have kept that little dirty trick for a little bit later for more permanent effect on the voting. As even though ballots are going out now, I think anybody that votes now is pretty much people that were always going to vote the way they voted. 99% of them were always going to vote whichever way it is. I mean, there's always people that are going to vote one way or the other no matter what. And I think that's who's going to vote right now. So I think the reason they did it is because they saw themselves slipping. And I believe the Democrats still seem to think they need to keep Joe Biden out of the debates if they all can do it. And the way to do it is to have Joe Biden in such a lead that he doesn't feel a need to debate. Whereas on the other hand, the Republicans and Trump would want to drag Biden into a debate where it's dubious he can really go for a full 90 minutes unscripted. I mean, given a script, given softball questions, he can kind of get through it and generally get his lines right. But I think in a free-form debate, I think it would just be a little bit much to hope for. So I think that's kind of where we are on the strategy session right now. The other thing that's bothered me a little bit, I think, is on the Senate races, because I always like to have, in any conflict concept, a plan B, a fallback option. And there is an interesting question between the presidential race, which is what we're putting the most emphasis on, obviously, and all these Senate races. Remember, the Republicans are defending a lot more vulnerable seats this time than the Democrats are. I think they've identified about no more than 3 Democrat seats that are vulnerable, and only one seems to be really a sure flip, and that's probably Alabama. That's almost certain to go Republican, I think. There's an interesting race heating up in Michigan, and that'll be very interesting to see how that goes, particularly if the demographics in the Rasmussen poll prove to be true, or at least partially true, and that is the African American vote going a little bit more in the Republican direction than has traditionally been the case. Remember, in most elections in recent years, the Republicans were in single digits, maybe even sometimes low single digits when they're running against Obama, and now it looks like that Trump's approval rating is at a relatively high level. Now, how many of those people ultimately actually vote for Trump is probably the trick, because it's one thing to have a certain attitude, and to actually do it is another thing. And that'll be something that a lot of these people have never done before. And so we'll just have to see how that turns out. I mean, but that could, for instance, flip Michigan. And I think Minnesota I'm kind of interested in because of all the Minneapolis rioting and all the demands to defund the police has got to have everybody but a hardcore liberal going, this is nuts. I mean, and so I would think that there's plenty of opportunity for the Senate candidate and for President Trump both to capitalize on that. Okay, so that's one aspect. A race we're kind of worried about, I think, particularly is Arizona, where you've got this astronaut who did the longest time in space and is a bit of a gun control advocate running against McSally, who's a former Air Force pilot, I think bird colonel in the A-10s. Sorry about that. Warthogs, yeah. And so anyhow, the point I'm making is he's so that's an interesting race. It looks like probably he's ahead. It looks like in most of the polling. We got hit with a real nasty move from Fox News, which came out 3 of the most outlier pro-Democrat state polls that are out there, which really annoys me. The Fox polls, I mean, they're not very helpful. I mean, because I doubt they're really accurate, given that they're against the consensus of polling. There's nothing about the Fox polls that makes them uniquely good. and they're certainly not biased Republican. I guarantee you that. So whatever. But so she's got a problem there, and then I guess I hear that the race in Montana is close, but hopefully it doesn't turn out that way. I think if Trump wins Montana strongly, he probably has a fairly good chance of pulling Daines over the railing. Colorado, I think we have a strong candidate there, and the Democrat has some ethics problems, I believe. On the other hand, it's a Democrat-leaning state, which Trump will probably lose. So, I mean, if Trump wins Colorado, probably things are going to go good otherwise. That's not how that goes. So, I mean, that's kind of the situation there. But I think a lot of focus should be put by conservatives more on these Senate races, because look at it two ways. Trump wins, he's critically going to need a majority in the Senate to get his agenda through, particularly his appointments to the courts, to cabinet officials, to anything that needs to be confirmed by the Senate. And that means a major roadblock if Democrats get in control in their radical state. On the other hand, if Trump were to lose, heaven forbid, but if it were to happen and we still held the Senate, the most radical things the Democrats want to do would be blocked with a filibuster. So that's why I think that we need to be very, very focused on the Senate. The House is another situation. And there I would think we'd have some good opportunities. We have a lot of freshman Democrats that won in districts that Trump won last time, and in many cases will probably win most of them this time. And so can we tap these Democrats out? They all said they weren't a Pelosi clone, but they pretty much have all turned into Pelosi clones. So I think there's a really good issue making Pelosi the centerpiece in these House races. Since the race is now considered by experts to be more nationalized because of the COVID shut-in situation, I think we ought to take a little cue from Newt Gingrich in the 1994 race and try to nationalize these congressional, Senate, and House races a little bit more, and focus on it from the following point of view, that this is really about the total future of the country. I mean, do you really want the country we've had under the past, under whether it be Bush, Obama, or Trump, or do we want to have something radically different we haven't seen before, a really radical left-wing, socialist-leaning government? And I think a lot of people, if it's framed that way, will realize that whether they love Trump or whether they really don't like him, it's a lot better than the alternative. Let's also remember that the Democrat candidate has a lot of weaknesses. He's almost too weak to actually survive through an entire term. And Kamala Harris is very radical, the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate would become president if he were to resign. And don't put it out of the question that Kamala Harris will work to make him resign too, particularly after the midpoint of the term, where she could then hopefully try to run for 2 terms. I don't know that she'd want him to leave before then, just because it gives her more options if they hang in for 2 years. But that is not a good situation for the country. And so I think that, again, the Democrats, as I said in the previous video some time back, that the Democrats realized that they made a strategic mistake, I think, when they won control in 2008, that they didn't take these radical moves at that time while they could. And now I think they're a little bit wanting to make up for lost time. The other thing to consider, what's also strategically important in the House, and this is something that with all the potential post-election balloting over mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and which ones are thrown out and which ones are counted and all this sort of thing, we have to focus on maintaining majorities in the state delegations in the House. If it goes to the House of Representatives, the election, we have to remember, is not going to be decided by the majority vote of the House. So even if the Democrats have the current majority or a somewhat lesser majority in the House, it's not going to be, 430 votes for Biden versus however many is left for Trump. No, it's going to be by state delegations. California only gets 1 vote. Alaska gets 1 vote. Texas gets 1 vote. Missouri gets 1 vote. Maine gets 1 vote. I don't need to go on. You get the idea. So, and the vote goes to whoever has a majority in the state delegation. That means, of course, that in states with even numbers of Democrats and Republicans, they'll probably cancel out. So they essentially abstain. In states with odd numbers, which at any rate, odd numbers or at any rate, whichever one has a majority, that vote will go to that one. So if in Michigan, I think, I forget the number, but let's just say that there was one more Republican than Democrat in the next Congress, then that state would go Republican, even regardless of what the popular vote was or anything else. So this is something that strategically the party needs to focus on, is focus on those districts to put extra effort into winning those House districts we need to have in order to make sure we have that House majority in the presidential follow-up vote in the event that the thing hangs up with Democrats, secretaries of state trying to block the Republican win or trying to steal the election. And remember, if it's at all possible, the Democrats will go all out to steal the election. Don't have any doubt about that. And so, like I said, if you have that backup, that if it did go to the House, they'd still lose, then it would be less motivation to try it. And so that's essentially what I have to say. The other thing is, if you can all do it with your health conditions and your concerns, try to vote in person rather than absentee. If you're in a state that's all mail-in ballots, well, I think the only one that's like that, well, there's two now. Suppose it'll be Nevada and, of course, Utah. Well, Utah, I think, will win handily anyhow, regardless of all the falderall. And I think that Nevada's probably on the wrong. We'll have to see, but I don't have much hope there. But other than that, in most states, it'll be absentee and or voting in person. And I would recommend voting in person. If you're more concerned about your health, I would say try to do it in the early voting. Wear your mask, whatever, hand sanitizer after you've got through voting. And I think you'll get through it okay. But I think that guarantees your vote to be counted in a way that mailing it in, if you didn't sign something or fill something out right, that's where it can go wrong. And so, and also, if you're in any environment where you see cheating going on, for goodness sakes, report it. Try to cause them as much trouble as possible. I mean, particularly if you're like a nursing home employee and some Democrat goes in there and tries to get all the old people to vote Democrat without knowing what they're doing or something like that. Try to report that sort of thing. I mean, we need to, this is an all hands on deck to save the country scenario. So that's just a few comments I have on the election, and we'll see what pans out next. I mean, so, we just got through the Democrats just threw their October surprise dirty trick. I guess that's what that was, and did it way early. I mean, the idea that regardless of what President Trump thought about the Vietnam War, I mean, come on, let's face it. I think almost everybody agrees the Vietnam War was not the most brilliant move we ever made. We honor the veterans for their sacrifices there, and we have sympathy for the way many of them were treated when they came back by the left, by the way. And now the left is trying to make Trump out to be the bad guy here. And he's done more for the veterans with the VA and those reforms than any president in decades. And he's supported the military with pay raises and getting funding for better equipment and provision. So any way you look at it, he's doing good by the military. And whether or not, let's don't let some visit to a cemetery or what somebody alleges, but unwilling to come forward publicly, affect us on that, because it doesn't matter now anyhow, in my opinion. That's kind of old stuff, and we should get on with what's ahead. We know that Biden is not going to be good for the military. So that's that. Well, anyway, I'll close this for now. If you like these videos, like and subscribe. There's a bell you can ring to get notified if I come up with anything. And also you can copy them and forward them to friends if you want, so they can see them. And that's it for now. Until next time.